Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. And actually, this is a very unique episode. It brings in a topic and a specific focus on a group of people that even I have failed to really talk about or pay extra special attention to. And so that is really a group of women in the between the ages of 45 and 55. So we're going to break that down. You're probably wondering, like, what exactly are we going to be talking about here? But I have a guest to help me through this discussion, and she is Ashlie Beiter, and she is the co-founder of Winona, a telehealth company that supports and empowers women experiencing menopause through doctor-prescribed hormone replacement therapy. Winona is recovering $1.8 billion worth of lost work productivity by helping around 50,000 women in the 45 to 55 age bracket in the U.S. manage menopausal symptoms like weight gain, depression, hot flashes, and mood swings, and also overcome stigma attached to menopause, which is really why we're talking about this today, too. It's so important. A passionate women's health advocate, Ashlie considers her work with Winona as her most important accomplishment to date. Since 2021, she has led a high-performing marketing team as VP of Marketing, growing Winona's online community from 0 to 10,000 plus on Facebook, and expanding the company's services to serve women in 34 states and territories. Ashlie is also involved with the Winona Corporate Wellness Education Initiative that supports working menopausal women who make up 26% of the workforce, out of which 40% find it challenging to work with menopause. She's also been featured in Life and Style and LA Weekly. Ashlie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for helping talk through this very important subject with us.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me, Traci, and actually make that 80% of women find it challenging to work during menopause.
Wow, 80%. So of the 26% of women who are in the workforce in this cohort of menopausal, I guess we could say the menopausal cohort, 80% of that 26 are saying that it's challenging to work.
Yes, there are a lot of national surveys coming out on this now. We've actually ran a few of our own just based on our patient, and we are finding around that 80% number being very consistent of women finding it challenging to really tackle their work initiatives or even show up to work and deal with the uncomfortable symptoms of menopause, like fatigue, weight gain, so many others. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are actually 135 symptoms associated with menopause.
No, I did not know.
So much more than what we are just told to believe, where it's like, yeah, it's like a little period like where you're uncomfortable, but it really affects every part of you. Your hormones are so important, and discussing these hormonal changes and how it affects us during this period and how we show up for people in our career is just so vital to open up and educate around. I don't think many people know that it can outlast 15 years, and this is a huge part of our workforce that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I've just learned something now. I mean, that's actually, it's shocking to hear that there are so many symptoms and that it can last for so long, because I think especially as women, we're not really taught that. We're taught maybe even from our mothers and grandmothers that, like, oh, they have a hot flash and that's about it. And sometimes women don't even receive hormone replacement therapy because they don't even know that that's like an option. I just know this from my own experience with people in my family that have not necessarily known that those options are available. And so I think about this obviously as a woman, but I also think about this as an HR professional and a practitioner in a business where it makes me think, gosh, like how many people have I worked with or worked for who have maybe found it challenging to continue working or to be at work while experiencing these symptoms, and have I in any way prevented them from getting the resources or support that they need? And so that's why I really think this episode is so important, because there are people listening, and the majority of people listening are not yet in this age group of 45 to 55, but they are in decision-making positions where they can impact that 26% of the workforce.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really is 35 to 59. A lot of people do think it starts in their 40s. Perimenopause can start as young as 35, even earlier. If a woman has had any surgeries like an oophorectomy or a hysterectomy, it's just not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. And I'm so happy you brought up the fact that a lot of women do find it challenging to get HRT or don't have the information that there's help out there. I think for generations and generations, we've been told it's just a part of life. You just get through with it and then come out the other side. And it's just time that we start talking about solutions to these. And where I think we're in a really good point for where we are right now historically is we're finally talking about programs to incorporate into the workplace. The UK actually just incorporated menopause into their Equality Act to where it can be seen as a disability. And they offer protection around women experiencing menopause. So they're able to have flexible work hours or take more PTO and options like that. So I think we're definitely getting better, and these initiatives that companies are looking forward to add has been very beneficial.
That's amazing. I think, hearing about really people who are getting the resources that they need, or this initiative to include this, this next phase of life and the things that come with that. And interestingly, I didn't know that it could start in the late 30s. That's, again, something now that I've learned in less than 10 minutes. But it's really nice to hear that now women in this cohort will have the resources that they need. And it does bring me to this thought that, when women choose to have families and they choose to have kids, there are not a ton, but there are resources for them, whether it's, of course, maternity leave or disability leave for you before you give birth or even after you give birth. And all of those resources are resources that did certainly take time, and depending on where someone lives in the United States or in other countries, they might not have as much access as other women in other parts of the country or the world do. However, most places in the United States have some access to resources when you're in this earlier phase of life and experiencing the moments in life where some women decide to expand their families. And so then I think, well, all of this discussion that we're having today is focusing on resources that don't exist after that phase of life. And it is specific to women, and it is, just like childbirth, specific to women who also, like childbirth, I guess I should say, is specific to women who choose to go through that experience most of the time. Menopause is not something you choose. It's something every woman goes through. And so I just, it's inevitable, I'm sure you come across this, to compare those two. And then you wonder, well, why isn't there support, or why aren't there resources for something that is inevitable for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, at Winona, we have definitely had this conversation more times than people can count. We talk so much about as women, there's so many options, either telehealth or in person, to get reproductive care. But you don't hear people talking about post-reproductive care. In the workplace, we talk about, maternity leave, like you mentioned. And I think there's even some companies that are now offering leave or surrounding menstrual cycles. But it's there's just
I've seen that.
No focus on menopause. And like you said, it's inevitable. And there's so many reasons that could lead to this. I don't know if maybe it's because we're now getting louder about what we're experiencing, and feminism has taken a great rise in the corporate workplace, and every generation is just being more open and inclusive. But like I said, thank God these programs are coming out. Thank God it's easier for women to have children and to have menopause resources. And I think having this conversation and talking to your listeners that are the decision makers and just letting them know it can start as young as 35. And this is 26% of the workforce. And even something like flexible work hours, or if you have the option to be able to work remote, can really help women feel more comfortable in the workplace. I know some companies, I believe maybe Google, it's one of the major tech companies, they've had menopause consultants actually come in to help discuss with employees, like, oh, okay, like which part of the transition are you in? And just try to help them find solutions in their area. Kind of like what you said, a big problem is access. What a woman has offered to her in San Francisco can be really different to what a woman has offered to her in rural California. Which is why, as Winona, we're really trying to be loud about our telehealth options. And if Winona telehealth isn't an option for either your employees or maybe yourself listening to this, I'm a huge proponent of NAMS.org. They have a menopause specialist finder. So you can find an OBGYN that is trained in prescribing hormone replacement therapy in your area. Also, all of our doctors have been prescribing hormone replacement therapy for years, and our menopause specialists as well. So if access is a hard time, we always welcome you with open arms. Or if you're an HR rep listening and you don't know where to go with your program, we aren't menopause consultants, but we do have a corporate program where we can come in and educate your workforce or yourself on what your employees might be experiencing and brainstorm with you some solutions of how to make your workplace more inclusive.
That's great. I mean, we definitely will have all of those resources in the show notes also. But I do think it's important to mention also for those listening, because 30% of listeners of my podcast are not women. And so I think sometimes these topics come up, and, you know, I haven't necessarily had anyone talk about menopause before on the podcast, but topics that are relative or maybe more relevant for women come up. And I always say it's equally important for men to hear and understand these significant challenges that women in the workforce are faced with, because in many instances they are also decision makers. And so when someone listening to this episode thinks about their average age of their organization, which could be 30, it could be 25, it could be 45, all of those ages, regardless, any woman, I should say, in their organization is inevitably going to be faced with the challenge of menopause, or not the challenge of, but the circumstance where they then are menopausal and then have those challenges that 80% of menopausal women are experiencing, to your point. So, you know, I do think, again, it's just important to call out that if this is not necessarily a topic even for women that people feel is important because maybe the average age of their organization presently is under 35, it doesn't really matter where your organization is today, because at the end of the day, again, if your organization is 50% women or is comprised of 50% of women, this will be relevant to them in the coming years. And I'm finding, especially in speaking with a lot of guests on my podcast, that organizations are better suiting themselves for future proofing by providing resources and opportunities and resources to their employees before they need them. And so that preemptive support that they're providing employees is, you know, a lot of what we're talking about here, that it might not be something that your current employee population thinks that they need, but eventually it's something that they might actually really appreciate. Because to your point, if there are 135 symptoms, I know that there are some symptoms physically, like whether it's changes to one's body or even body odor and things that, when we think about like the workplace and the workplace dynamic, when you're in person, those things become much more challenging to tackle. And I just, I'm going to call it out, like body odor is something like for HR professionals, we never want to have to deal with a situation when a leader or someone says like, this person has body odor and it's offensive or it's becoming like a disturbance, right? But inevitably, this is something, I mean, even just in perusing the Winona website, that's one of the major symptoms that is listed. So I can imagine when you're saying that flexibility or remote work is a major perk for someone going through this, like I can understand why, if that's something that they're experiencing, before being able to speak with a medical professional around resolving some of those symptoms.
As an HR professional, I know that managing HR for a workforce comes with its challenges, and managing a global workforce even more so. Using multiple tools for different countries and employee types complicates everything. Costs go up, efficiency goes down, you get the picture. Deal is here to change that. That's DEEL. Whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or anything in between, Deal simplifies global team management, payroll, hiring, and more. Deal HR streamlines your global operations with built-in compliance to lower costs and maximize efficiency. With self-service onboarding, new hires can be up and running in minutes. Sign documents, track expenses, and approve PTO in seconds. Plus, with Deal, you can easily oversee global cost reviews, headcount, and more with centralized reporting. Ready to see how Deal HR can transform your global operations for free? Head to Deal.com to book a demo today. That's DEEL.com.
I mean, absolutely. It's so much more than body odor. Like, body odor is terrible, but we've talked to so many women that are in the height of their career. I remember one woman, she was working at an oil company, very male-dominated workforce, and she was presenting to the C-suite when she got a flash period. And yes, in front of the entire C-suite. And then she said, that was the worst day of my life. Yeah. I left, took care of that, and then to only come back to redo the presentation and be plagued with hot flashes the entire time and have sweat beads dripping down her face. So,
that's terrible.
It's terrible for the person, terrible for the C-suite to have to witness, and it's just not good for morale. Women want to feel supported. Like you said, a lot of workforces might be younger. I know Winona's telehealth company, we're very big into our tech, so like we do have younger employees. We are putting our all into them now and training them, but retaining them is just as important as training, and being able to provide benefits that are going to last them 10 years, looking down the scope of their life, is vital. We don't know if they want to have kids. Obviously 401k is so important, but like menopause care and like discussing this now, what we'll offer them, is also just as important. And some of the companies that we partnered with have also been able to add benefits to their wellness wallets without affecting their bottom line, which I think is important because, of course, HR wants to do as much as possible, but it also has to be fiscally responsible. Even programs of educating people in your workforce of how to use their FSA dollars and finding companies online or in person that will cover these menopause symptoms using what they already have accessible is big. I think a lot of people don't realize that it already might be included.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too, is like, you know, even thinking about like the bottom line and the fiscal responsibility there, is that actually, like many benefits, you can offer extensive benefits and not everyone is going to take advantage of them. If people don't know, to your point, like how to leverage their FSA, HSA dollars, then they go underutilized. And so there is this component of education, which is why this conversation is also so important, because like I said, I learned so much in the first 10 minutes. I mean, there were things I literally did not know and I probably should know as a woman. And, you know, I think it's interesting. Like I can speak only from my own experience, like working in HR, working for companies, big and small. There is, I think, with women, this, and I think I mentioned it even while reading your bio, like a stigma attached to a lot of things. Not even menopause, but really just being a woman. Like when I first like found out that I was pregnant, I was like, is this going to, I knew that it wasn't, but it's like I think a rational like concern, like, is this going to impact my promotability at work? And luckily I work for a company where that would not impact my promotability. But, it's so interesting. I work for a company that supports women and supports women growing their families, but I still had that small little like voice in my head that worried about the stigma associated with balancing and wanting to balance like having a family and wanting to be a successful, professional. And so that there are those stigmas. There are also just generalized stigmas as from being a woman in leadership or a woman in business, like they're depending on where someone works. And so I think when we think about our ability as HR professionals, whether we're women or not, to be able to really continually support women in the workforce, especially, I always bring it up on my podcast, we know that women left the workforce in droves during COVID because they became like caregivers at home and home takers versus staying employed, because like with kids being home from school, we obviously know what happened during COVID. I won't rehash any of that, but all of that to say that there are fewer women in the workforce now than there were. And so we have to really see this as momentum for bringing women back into the workforce and supporting them when they're here. The same argument for, and I like how you phrased it, reproductive versus post-reproductive experiences in life. Like there's still ways to go with reproductive benefits. So if companies can get ahead of that feedback and realize that they have pre-reproductive and reproductive women in their depending on their ages, and then the post-reproductive cohort, like all of those cohorts need support. And I'm sure that there are resources that men need as well. But right now we know that there are certain things that women experience at certain moments in their lives. And again, menopause is something that's inevitable. So how do we partner with organizations like Winona to better understand how we can support those people? And so with that, I'm curious, especially since you've kind of mentioned some stories here and examples that help us to better understand the critical need, but with Winona and the companies that you work with, what are some ways or areas where you feel companies can immediately offer support without having this huge lift or without making a massive financial investment?
Well, I think they should look at their benefits program, see what they're already offering. If you do offer FSA or HSA benefits, provide a list of resources where they can actually use those dollars. The FSA store is great. They have a whole menopause section and also period care section. So great for women, even great for men. They have eyewear, Oura rings, super comprehensive. So it would be good for your entire workforce. Also, if you don't have FSA or HSA, some companies are partnered with wellness wallets, like I mentioned. I know Forma is a pretty big wellness wallet. Take your employees through there. You would be shocked of how many new hires or even people that have been there forever that just didn't read the HR email and don't know what's going on with. Have those in videos, document it. And then if you're already doing all of that, take October. Yeah, I guess we're halfway, almost done with October. Yeah. Take October History Month to have a moment with your workforce to talk about how some of these events in women's life do impact work and what you're going to do as a resource to help. Maybe it's being able to offer a flexible work day where they can choose to work from home. Maybe it's referring them to different sources where they can learn more about what they're experiencing, or just being able to have it in the PTO request form of like, no, I don't want to discuss. I just need a day off, because menopause, a huge part of it is just waking up feeling so fatigued and not sleeping through the night where you cannot perform. It's pretty drastic for some people, and not for everyone. Everyone's situation is different, like I mentioned, but for those people that are, those are the 1 in 5 women that are reporting leaving the workforce due to symptoms. So offering programs like that to retain such a good option.
Amazing. That's really helpful. And thank you for giving the listeners some tangible ideas and resources. And it just brings me back also to this other thought and realization that people are exiting the workforce later and later. And so the reality is that average age is probably going to continue to go up. Of course, we know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are going to, enter the workforce more and more, but still, if the workforce, if there are more generations in the workforce ever now than before, then we know that more people above a certain age, potentially even above the age of 50, are going to remain in the workforce. And, the other thing that we might have talked about before when we first spoke, before we started recording, is this concept that I think hopefully a lot of listeners have thought about. I've brought this up before, but the idea of ageism, and that there is this unfortunate instance, especially I think in business, where people become overqualified for certain jobs. And, generally there's this sense that once you hit a certain age, you become too experienced, too tenured. And it happens a lot. There was that show Younger that was based on this, where she, I don't remember what channel it was on, but I don't know if you've even watched it, but she basically, she left the workforce to raise her family, tried to get back into the workforce, and she was overqualified for every job she was qualified for. And she was not able to get a job at all until she basically lied about her age, which I don't recommend doing that. It's also probably physically impossible with background checks, but
it's so real. I remember when Winona was just starting, I was doing most of the interviews for every position, and I had a position open for patient services, which is our customer service, but we don't have customers, we have patients. And it was kind of a low level position. Didn't need extreme tech experience, just anyone that was good with people and had an understanding of menopause or empathy, we would have been excited to meet with. And I got this resume for a woman who had 15 years of nurse practitioner experience focusing in women's health, applying for this position, and the pay wasn't much, and it was part-time. And so I actually scheduled a call with her because I thought it was a mistake. And
because you're like, what, how, and why?
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to meet with her because maybe she was looking for a bigger position. Maybe we can talk about it. Let's just get on a call. So I scheduled a call with her. And the first question I asked is this the role you intended to apply for? And she was like, yes, I want to work on your customer service staff, and I want to help out with emails and basic account questions. And I was like, we have 15 years of experience practicing. Don't you
in the field? Yeah.
With us? And then she was like, no, I just want to do this. This is what I want to do. And I've been rejected from so many jobs because I have so much experience. She said she actually applied to work as a bookstore clerk, and then they denied her because she had so much experience. She was overqualified. And she was like, I want a fun job. I've done the whole big job. Now I just want something nice and easy and somewhere where I can make an actual impact on a bigger initiative, which is why she ended up with us. And she has since very much grown. But I'll never forget that interview. I just continued to think it was a mistake the entire time.
Wow, that's amazing, and thank you for sharing that story. It's actually a very perfect example of how resumes can really showcase someone's experience, and then there could be someone on the receiving end of that resume judging them for their experience. Not you, obviously, because you did exactly what I would hope anyone reading a resume would do, which is let me figure out why this person applied for this job. Because I always say people apply for jobs intentionally. Sometimes there are mistakes, we know that to be true, and sometimes there are spam resumes. That also happens. Very rarely, but it happens. But if someone is applying for a job that requires maybe minimal experience, and they obviously have a great deal of experience, to your point and your story, there's something more there. There's a question to be asked. There's something to uncover, an onion to peel back. And I do think that folks who are really above the age of 45, where most, I think is is it 40 or 45 where age is protected? I can't remember all of the ADA rules, but I'll put it in the show notes. But I think it's 40. But when we understand that there's a protected class in there for a reason with age, and then we couple that with the challenges that, specifically when we're talking about menopausal women, are experiencing. There are so many stigmas that people are faced with, whether they're women or men at that age group. And then you have all of these inevitable medical conditions and the challenges that come with those things added on to that cohort. So I do think from an HR perspective, from a business leader perspective, people listening have a real responsibility to change the discussion and the way that age is discussed in the workplace so that we've reduced the stigma and we understand that experience is something that should be valued. Like, we should want people who have these experiences to teach us and to be able to learn from those folks. And all in the same breath, we need to support those people who are in those age groups so that they can remain in the workforce and feel supported all the while. So thank you again for sharing that story. That is amazing to hear.
Yeah, I'm excited. I feel like there's probably so many similar stories to that, where the person where you couldn't believe that their resume ended up on your lap and were questioning it, like, ended up becoming one of your best employees and best friends to this day.
Yes. No, that's amazing. I love that she's grown too with Winona. Like, inevitable. This is, of course, the story that you're going to have. That's amazing. But with that, Ashlie, I really appreciate that you walked us through some really critical information, and that I'm sure that the majority of the listeners have learned something new today, especially myself. And for anyone listening who's interested in learning more about Winona or even getting connected for their organizations, where can they go? Where can they find you and learn more?
So, like I mentioned, if they have any questions about their workforce, they can email us at careers@bywinona.com. They can also find our one-pager about how to support women in the workforce at bywinona.com/employers. And we're also on the HSA store for your employees. But if you're just a woman listening that's curious to learn more, you can go to our homepage and sign up.
Amazing. I am going to make sure that I include that employer's one-pager and all of the links that you've just mentioned in the show notes, so everyone can get connected and learn more. Thank you so much for joining the podcast this week. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much, Traci. Thank you, listeners, for listening.
Yes, thank you, listeners. Love that.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.